Hi there, welcome to the latest edition of The Front Page. Early season's greetings to you. This is our festive gift, a discussion on some key racing issues. We will be looking at how we can make a day at the races more engaging. We're looking forward to a fascinating festive racing programme and discussing a speech at the Gimcrack Dinner last week that raised a few eyebrows. My name is Lee Mottershead and I've not seen these two lovely people for a few weeks. My colleagues Chris Cook and Maddy Playle, how are we both?
Who are you going to?
Let's go with you. You're closest, Maddy. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, Lee. I'm still operating slightly on Hong Kong time as I was out there for the international races. Always a great week. Always good just to get a different perspective on racing, and I'm sure I'll reference that a few times throughout the show. But yeah, fantastic racing. Really enjoyed it, and it's just an amazing spectacle.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, you haven't been going quite so far afield last few days.
No, I haven't really been much out of Cheltenham for weeks, which is how I like it.
It's not a bad place to be.
Why would you need to? No, I'm just enjoying the jump season, still trying to puzzle out in my head, whether we got the right result in the December Gold Cup. They had that sort of coming together.
But I saw in the Cook review, the bang.
Gimcrack and Madara, and it just, always slightly frustrates me because to me that seems like a really interesting thing to talk about after the race, and nobody did talk about it. The stewards had a wee look to decide if there'd been interference and whether they should be changing anything, and they slightly copped out by saying it hadn't changed the outcome anyway. So they didn't have to get into the messy business of deciding who was at fault. I think if you decide Gimcrack's at fault for what happened there, then you probably have to demote him, don't you? I'm sure it would have changed the result.
Oh gosh, now you're opening another can of worms. Do we have time for
I feel like
this week?
with such high-powered people as you on the panel, we can't have enough cans of worms, frankly.
I was talking to you, not me.
I mean, if you were the steward, would you have demoted him?
I don't think so. No.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny thing when these things happen in mid-air. People are much more forgiving.
I thought, if anything, Madara was slightly to blame for the collision, and I thought Gimcrack was value for the winning distance anyway. I backed Madara, and I thought at the last, here we go, I've come to collect, and
well, that is quite persuasive.
Braver horse just won.
I mean, to me, it looked like Gimcrack jumped right, and he was at fault, and because he's bigger as well, Madara came off second best, but evidently.
It's probably
that's
one of
hotly
those
debated, right?
In Formula One, we'd call it a racing incident. It's just one of those things.
I didn't see a head-on either. I don't know if you did.
Yeah.
And you felt
I don't think that was.
Yeah, all right. That's another thing that bugs me about racing is, head-ons are so interesting and they hardly ever get sort of saved online. So if you don't happen to see it during part of the live broadcast, it's gone forever. I think routinely when there's an issue, the head-on should get saved online as part of all the replays that you can get from us and from RTV and other places.
Well, what Chris has very cleverly done there is provided a neat segue into our first story, which is his story about how we can make the racing experience better, and in particularly a day at the races better, more engaging, more enjoyable. And Chris, that links to a column our colleague David Jennings wrote on Saturday.
Yes, stirred things up a bit, as DJs want to do, talking about how, in his view, the race day experience has to be made, substantially more interesting, just so that you keep people engaged who might not come through the gates with a ready-made love of the sport. And this is a hobby horse that I've ridden before. I do think that there's quite a few race courses out there that are sort of resting on their laurels a little bit. And it's in part it's a tradition thing, I think, because we're a sport that's always left people to their own devices. And most of the time when you raise this subject with established racecourse, they talk about how, I don't want to be pestered with stuff over the tannoy, I know what to do when I'm at the races, leave me in peace. But it's not the experience that people get when they go to other sporting occasions. Most other venues, I would suggest, take responsibility for making sure that your racecourses are entertained all the time. It's just not enough to open the gates and stage 7 horse races and then send people home. And I particularly liked in DJ's column his suggestion of a particular area within the track, which is aimed at sort of hardcore specialist racing fans, people who are specifically there for the sport, not just to have a good time, not to be there with their mates, not to get sloshed, but actually to engage with the sport. And so this would be a place where you can go and sort of discuss or listen to people discussing the race that's just happened and any controversial issues arising, and then look forward to the next race. So I mean, lots of tracks do that very basic thing before racing, where you've got one guy in the paddock who's the MC interviewing some other guy who's got views about each of the races in turn. Quite often it's a bookie, and it's so basic, you know. It's sort of, they've been doing that, you know, since the microphone was invented, and there's got to be some development. I feel like as a sport we haven't, you know, advanced our game in that particular area. There must be a whole load of different things that we could try. The thing that I always say that really bugs me, if you've got some big field race, you know, particularly in the summer, it might be a sprint handicap that happens out there, and you're sort of still relatively new to the game, you might not know where your horse has ended up somewhere in the ruck, you know, because these things are over in 55 seconds sometimes. And you know what it's like, you know, the colours might look a bit different to what's there in the race card, and you don't quite latch onto where your horse is in the field. You know, what a frustrating experience. You've done your money, you're physically there, and you still don't quite know what's happened. So, you know, we ought to make more of an effort to, you know, to let people know, if you fancied this horse, this is what happened to it. Here's the excuse that the jockey's just given it weighing in, you know, shed a plate or whatever, you know, this finished lame maybe. Here's what the trainer says. You know, that information at least ought to be available somewhere on at the track, so that if you're fully engaged with the sport, or if you're even just a bit curious, you know, you can have that fed back to you. Whereas it's sort of, you're treated as though you're an expert, or otherwise you're not really interested. And I don't think that's the best way to kind of to grow the interest and to sustain people and get them back more than once a year, you know, which we know is the average for each race score. You know, they tend to go racing once or twice per year, and you know, surely the best way for racecourses in particular to build their income is to get people coming back more often. And you know, I really think, you know, if we make more of an effort in that direction, if we let people know that we care about the sport, then they will care about it more, and that's how you get them back through the gates, I think. I worry slightly when it comes to the people who are working at racecourses. They may not, in the majority, be fans of the game themselves. You know, they may see themselves as working in hospitality, say, or entertainment, rather than racing specifically. You know, their ambition might be not to go and end up working at Cheltenham or Aintree, say, but to, you know, go to the fancy hotel down the road. And so they're not thinking in the same way that a real racing fan would be. And they don't understand or expect the things that a racing fan would want in order to have their interest in the sport developed. So I mean, that's the kind of thinking that we need. I think you see quite a bit of it at places like Pontefract, where they come up with some quite interesting initiatives, and some of them bear fruit and some don't, but at least they're trying stuff. And you know, more of that spirit, I think, would be very helpful.
Maddy, you're someone who loves racing, loves watching racing, loves betting on racing. Now, generally when you go racing, you're working, so you always have stuff to do. On those occasions when you go as a race goer, do you find the day itself as a whole engaging and entertaining, or do you find that there are times when you would like stuff to do, stuff to see, stuff to think about?
I think it's one of those things, because we're used to quite this sort of pithy offering, we don't really think much of it. But then when you think about what could be done to enhance the experience, you think, actually, that might be all right. And I think some of what Chris has touched upon is try it, see. Yeah. And if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work, and you can go back, or you can try something different.
Let's see some innovation, definitely.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's easy for me to say this having just got back from Hong Kong, and I will go into this a bit later, and obviously this was a big international Group 1 meeting, but there was atmosphere throughout the day. There was an opening ceremony, there was a closing ceremony, there was performers. The queue for the gift shop, I was reporting on the first international race, the Vase, the Hong Kong Vase. And after the second race, I think it was, I waited in the gift shop line, and it took me 2.5 races, I'd say, to get to the till. And that was with some, you know, it was quite incredible. Just the appetite for spending money on merchandise is absolutely incredible.
What sort of merch are we talking about?
I bought a cute little key ring, a plushy key ring.
I mean, can you get like silks and stuff, or?
Not quite. There are a lot of different offerings though. You can get stuff like wallets, belts even. You can get these interestingly like cut out paper sort of sculptures.
Okay.
Lots of specific things to their top racehorses, which I love.
Yeah, I was going to say.
So there was lots of romantic warrior merchandise. Even on the track, you see the enthusiasm. It's a fan base. They have the silks. You know, there's photos of people screaming about this. It's like celebrity culture. But anyway, look, I understand on a wet Wednesday night in Stoke or whatever, or the equivalent in the UK, is people aren't going to have that budget to play with. You know, we don't have a distinct marketing arm, but I think as DJ touched upon in his piece, and as you've said, Chris, is you don't need to be necessarily thinking of expensive solutions.
No.
You know, if we can be agile with the resources that we've already got.
Very much the other thing, I think.
And the resources we already use, you know, the MC, for instance, and the person they're interviewing, there can be some very small tweaks made to just make it much more engaging and interesting. And even as someone who is a hardcore racing fan and devotee, you know, it'd be great to go to a race course and listen to one of those conversations and think, oh, actually, I hadn't thought of that. You know, I think there can be someone for everyone in these discussions. Stimulating
the conversation is a good thing, isn't it? I mean, I think, again, some of the people running tracks, they worry about, you know, if we start those conversations about why did the favourite just finish unplaced, you're going to get people saying, you know, unpalatable things about the ride it was given or the way it was trained or whatever.
I think
the
opposite. The more you talk,
there's a lot of fear there, you know.
Yeah, you sort of expose, for want of a better word, this sort of darkness behind what's actually happened. Like you're saying, if it's you know, a favourite's been beaten or it's spread a plate or the jockey said it was too keen or whatever, the more we are transparent about these things, I think that builds trust. Whereas if you keep your core audience in the dark, they're going to probably go to the nefarious. Definitely
turn away from you, I think, is what will happen. Yeah. You have to talk about it, don't you? I think when a horse runs disappointingly, and that just doesn't happen. And you know, when I'm not at the races, it's one of the first things I do. And this might not put me in a very attractive light, but I mean, if a horse that I was expecting to run well runs really badly and there's no immediate explanation forthcoming, I do go on social media. I go on Twitter, I was going to call it X now, and see what people are saying about it. And quite often you could predict it in advance. You know, it's not necessarily very likeable stuff, but you want to hear what people's views are. You want to be part of that conversation and then decide for yourself what do I actually think.
I think interactive is the key term.
Yeah.
I think, like you say, going to the races can actually, and I'm quite a big fan of going racing on my own. You know, growing up, I didn't have any sort of friends or family into racing. I'd go racing alone a lot, and I quite enjoy it. But it can be quite a solitary pursuit, you know, spending the whole day sort of in a bubble, if you like. And if there was more interaction between everyone, you know, if you could get trainers to come out and talk more, jockeys. I mean, we've seen what the PJA, etc., have done with the Under Jockeys Orders initiative that they had at York in the summer, and they also had at Newbury on Coral Gold Cup Day about, you know, having the jockeys' names on the back of their breeches, and there's a jockey gym and explanations about what jockeys do and that sort of thing. I think that is absolutely brilliant. Let's do more of that, please.
Do we DJ, you talked about Hong Kong, Maddie. DJ referenced in the column, we spoke about this programme, the great success of this year's Melbourne Cup Carnival as an event in terms of soaring attendances, lots of young people there, and he's asking how have they done that? Well, they sold that and they built that as an event and aimed to get lots of young people there. There was a real emphasis on fashion, there was emphasis on entertainment. They had 140 music acts playing in 25 different venues across the day, across the 4 days. And also just thinking about Aussie racing too, that they do very well, which might be harder to do over here because we have more meetings being broadcast by the racing channels. But if you're at, say, a Friday night at Moonee Valley, they will have on the big screens, broadcasting out across the racecourse, the racing TV broadcast of the racing, so that the people who have paid to go racing are getting the same information, data, analysis as everybody who is watching at home. There's that problem that you can have when you go racing.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
How are we so far behind these other jurisdictions?
I suppose it might be harder over here because say you've got racing TV and they're doing 4 meetings in one day, you might actually not get a lot of your meeting unless they broadcast a dedicated feed, and they'd have to
Well,
expand that
but
then. But
you could do that.
there surely has to be if you've got these big screens that are there to be used,
Yeah.
and really they're not being utilised for much of the day, surely just broadcast the
It's not very
dedicated...
agile, is it? I think we could be more agile.
Yeah. If I was running a racecourse, my ambition would be to not just put out somebody else's broadcast. But I mean, you definitely, the point you want to address is that you don't want your racecourse to feel like they're missing out on information that people sitting at home were getting. And I mean, it's so easy to lap up sport sitting at home on the sofa, isn't it? Because you've got your cheap beer in the fridge nearby, and it's just, you can flick channels and take in all manner of stuff. So that's what racecourses are competing with. And that, I think, is why they have to try and keep prices down when they can, and they have to try and make sure that people feel when they leave that they've been thoroughly entertained and they've had great value. I mean, to your point about the expense of it, I think the people that you're aiming at with this kind of initiative would be, your value seekers, the people who don't necessarily have lots to spend. And I worry again that racecourses are sort of thinking more about the really wealthy patrons, and as far as I can tell, they look after those folk pretty well. But in order to maintain the sport's popularity and relevance, you need numbers of people coming in, and inevitably not all of those guys are going to be able to afford huge amounts per ticket or catering once they're inside. But you still need them, and you need to keep them engaged.
Fascinating stuff. Hopefully more fascinating stuff to come after a short break. And before we get to part 2, the Racing Post Members Club is, of course, the perfect Christmas present. Welcome back to the front page. Coming up, we look ahead to the Christmas racing programme and all the goodies it has in store. But before that, a discussion of something that has already taken place in York on Tuesday at the racecourse. It was the 253rd Gimcrack Dinner, which is traditionally highlighted by a speech given by a senior industry figure. On this occasion, it was Conor Grant, who is chair of Racecourse Media Group, the parent company of Racing TV, and Conor was previously the chief executive of Flutter's UK and Irish division, and therefore he was a senior figure in the bookmaking industry. In what was a powerful speech delivered in front of some of the sport's key stakeholders, Conor Grant outlined what he believed are the 3 challenges racing in Britain must meet if it is to thrive. And his speech, I think it's safe to say, although powerful and bold, was warmly received by many in the room, but with others perhaps a few eyebrows were raised. One of his key points was that racing needs to have a closer and better relationship with the betting industry. Conor painted a picture of an industry which he said is in decline, and betting on the sport is certainly in decline. He said we need to partner more with bookmaking to collaborate and develop joint initiatives that create new innovative products tailored to our sport, which modernise the betting experience and appeal to younger audiences. There was also a reference to getting younger audiences involved in the sport in one of his other key things, which was the need to make racing better as a consumer product, with links to what we were discussing earlier on about the race day experience. He spoke about the need to have collective investment in a centre of excellence to drive engagement across the consumer touch points of watching, betting, attending and ownership. But perhaps the biggest chunk of his speech was about racing's failings as a governance model. He spoke about the governance model in British racing being not fit for the 21st century, and then picking up points that were raised in a Racing Post special report earlier this year on the governance model. He said decision making is slow, complex and often paralysed by self-interest. Fixture planning and innovation are stymied by competing interests, leading to stakeholders often prioritising their own interests over those of the sport. And he called for the BHA to be empowered, re-energised and restructured, enabling it to lead with clear vision and a strategic plan. Conor Grant said the BHA must be given both the financial resources and the mandate to deliver transformative change. Chris, it was strong stuff from someone who was in bookmaking, now has a powerful position in racing, and being sat in the room and looking around at faces, I felt it was his call for racing to work more closely with bookmaking that perhaps got most, where people weren't necessarily easy with what he's saying was that. I mean, I thought there was complete logic in what he said, but it didn't necessarily find favour with everybody. What was your take on what he said?
I mean, so it's a slightly familiar plea, isn't it?
Absolutely.
To say that we've got ossified power structures, and we can never agree on anything, and so nothing ever changes. That's all really familiar, and so it's uncontroversial to say we've got to find a different way of doing things. When you start talking about how to change it, though, that's the issue, isn't it? Are mandates granted in the way that he describes, or are they earned over time by leadership that shows it can be trusted? I mean, at the moment, I don't know how much enthusiasm there would be for just sort of giving a lot of power to the BHA and say, go for your lives, folks. Work away, and we'll see what happens. Plus, he's talking in the absence of a particular plan. I think if you had, some sort of idea from the centre about the direction which they wanted to take us, then maybe you could get people signing up and saying, well, all right, you can give that a whirl for 2 years and we'll see what happens. I mean, we're still dealing with the sort of latest big idea to come from the sports central governments, which was premierisation, which so far wouldn't lead you to think that the next big idea is going to be worth signing up for. That would be basically my position. I'm all in favour of slimming things down and making the sport more leadable.
It's just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, though, isn't it?
Well, I mean, you need a good idea for it. What do you mean, premierisation? Yeah. I mean, it might have led somewhere. The effort in that direction has been so half-hearted. Maybe because people didn't really sign up for it before it was started. So that's my thinking. It's all very well saying that, but you've got to let people know the direction in which they're going to be led before they'll sign up.
Clearly, there has to be merit in what he said about racing has to get away. Racing stakeholders have to get away from their attachment to thinking about what is best for them. I mean, Nevin Truesdale, who sits on the commercial committee, soon to leave the Jockey Club as chief executive, was very honest in the racing post earlier this year, so that even within the commercial committee, all too often, key stakeholders thinking not what is best for the long-term interest of British racing, it's what's best in the short term for my organisation, for the one that I lead, the one that I represent. No sport is going to thrive in that sort of scenario.
Yes, but you're asking a lot when you're asking, individual successful businesses to sort of give up their self-interest, in exchange for what? That's
Survival
just not something.
Of the sport.
Well, it's a nice enough aim, but I mean, what's the detail on how you're going to get there? What are they going to be giving up, and what do they get in exchange? I think asking a lot of successful businesses in the blind to just sign up for something like that is a big ask, particularly when you don't even have a chief exec at the BHA right now. So, I mean, never mind a particular mission. I completely understand the call, but I think it's asking a lot in the present environment.
What about, Maddy, the call for racing to have a better, different, more developed, closer relationship with bookmakers? This line about, he says, we need to partner more with bookmaking to collaborate and develop joint initiatives. But he also said, we need to re-engage with bookmakers by demonstrating that racing is serious about growing its audience and putting innovation at the heart of the sport. Now, that implied a belief that racing up to now has not been serious about growing its audience and putting innovation at the heart of the sport.
Well, there's so many different things I could say to that. Well, first off, we know that we don't have a dedicated marketing arm, and it's not a terribly well supported.
Well, we have one, but there's no money, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's not very financially supported to be able to try and do that and address the concerns that it needs to. I think racing, betting, we know they're inextricably linked. We know that betting is one of racing's most important income streams. It's vital to its survival. So I guess that call makes a lot of sense to me, and that's a relationship that should be, given more energy to, and we need to perhaps reach a little bit more harmony whether it be regarding, the levy or media rights income streams. That battle continues to roll on and on. I think in terms of innovation and investing in the future, like Chris has said, I think it's having confidence in what racing is doing. And I think the supplies are running pretty dry at the minute in terms of, as a racing fan, how do you feel about the future of the sport? As a bettor, how do you feel about the future of the sport? I mean, we only need to talk about the black hole in racing to worry about that. As I say, I've been sort of slightly detached from this conversation, given that I've been away. But before I did go away, I hosted a show with Tom Siegel and Paul Keeley. And in the sort of chit-chat pre-show, I found it very interesting. We were chatting about racing's future and finances. And, there was a shared concern. I was sort of saying to them, you're far more experienced than me. This is two gentlemen who have made their living and their livelihood and, their life's joy, I guess, from horse racing. What do you think of the future? And safe to say, it wasn't terribly positive. And it was something that I could relate to, even being as relatively new to the sport as I am. And when you have two people of that sort of experience and stature who have spent, a great deal of money in the game and on the game, and they love it dearly, that's just another reminder of the stage of alarm that we're all at, I think.
You have to be careful about listening to guys of my age, though, because we're always going to hark back to what it was like when we were young. And since there's been change since then, obviously things must have got worse, because, you always want it to be how it was when you first got attracted to the sport. And inevitably, things do actually change.
No, but I think if you look, Chris, at betting turnover plummeting. Yeah,
lots to worry about
the mounting problems that racing is facing. I don't think you can say that in terms of.
I'm not arguing for complacency. I'm just saying that there's a risk if you're only going to talk to guys who are over 50.
There's not many other people to talk to in racing if that's your argument.
Wow. One thing I
no,
did
I'm
think
joking.
Before we move on, speaking as again a man of a certain age, I thought what Conor Grant said from his perspective as chair of Racecourse Media Group, and some of the things he said maybe indicated that there isn't the unanimity of opinion within the racecourse sector on some key issues that perhaps we might have been led to believe. I just wonder whether he talked about things like people shouldn't be sat on multiple organisations, multiple committees within racing. Well,
yeah, that was an interesting point to make. I hadn't heard in the open air before. You absolutely see the importance of it. That's going to be one of the things that sort of slows down the decision-making process. Did you think he was aiming that at anyone in particular?
Well, I mean, David Armstrong was in the room when we did the piece earlier in the year about the governments. It was hard to how many boards he sits on. Now, David made the point that he says I take my hat off and I represent each board, if you like, as I'm supposed to. But clearly, I think a lot of people during that piece highlighted that it does seem bizarre that someone can wear so many hats at the same time, and no matter how principled any individual might be in those circumstances, it seems an odd way to do things. And I sense that what Conor Grant was saying there was making that point. Yeah,
it really makes sense to me. I mean, that could be part of the streamlining process that he's asking for. But as I say, you have to have an alternative future to offer people first before you can start leading them in any particular direction,
Should we talk about the immediate future?
Yeah, go on then.
The immediate future, as well as sort of Santa's arrival on December 25th. What comes after for us as racing fans is particularly exciting, is it not, Maddie?
It is. It's an absolute feast. And it could be one of the best races we've seen for many years. How many times do we say that?
Which one?
And it doesn't pay off. The Christmas Hurdle is, of course, the race I'm talking about. The potential duel between Constitution Hill, the lesser spotted Constitution Hill. Maybe that's not fair, actually.
Perfectly fair.
You think it's perfectly fair? Okay.
We understand the reasons why.
Yes,
but he's definitely lesser spotted.
It wasn't a jibe. It was just a fact, I suppose. And we haven't seen him in quite a while.
Events.
Yeah, and Lossiemouth, of course, who looked just so good when she downed Tihupu in that Hatton's Grace. Now, there's a lot of... I'm a big advocate of fighting talk in racing. I think it really just engages us, and, you know, I love when Nicky's saying, oh, you know, he's 100% on track, Constitution Hill, for the fighting... not the fighting fifth, the Christmas hurdle, of course, after missing the fighting fifth. And Willie Mullins sort of saying, you know, bring it on, let's go for it. And I think the more we can have of that, the better. The only trouble with doing that is you have to deliver. And that's something that we've not seen very often. We didn't see it in the Morgiana, of course, when Lossiemouth had a stone bruise. These are horses that you're dealing with. You can never count on 2 horses turning up. How many jewels have we had that have gone down the wayside in recent years? But we have had some great ones.
Yeah,
you know, you think of the Shishkin and Ergamine battle.
I mean, that was interesting just because it seemed so unlikely that they would both actually turn up. We talked about it for ages, sort of thinking this is totally going to fall apart near the time, and it happened.
And
you know,
same
and it was a
two
great
stables
race.
here, same two
Yeah,
stables.
same 2 stables, and I think that kind of narrative brings a bit more oomph to proceedings. Let's make things interesting. I'll go first. I would much rather back Lossiemouth at Kempton's over Kempton's 2 miles, getting the £7 to Constitution
Yeah, the
Hill.
£7 is big, isn't it?
That gallop behind Sergino was deplorable, even if he has had a reason for it. I just think the trajectory of Constitution Hill's career now is concerning to me. You know, whether it's the serious, colic, whether it's a random wind operation out of nowhere seemingly, whether it's the poor gallop when they thought he was spot on for it, whether it's Kempton before Cheltenham, there's just so much
Do you
question there
do you
now.
know the odds off the top of your head?
I don't.
I've not seen any betting for this race. I know that Lossiemouth is 15-8 favourite for the champion hurdle with Constitution Hill at 7-2. One would imagine that there'll be a smaller field for this race than they might expect for the champion hurdle, but because it's coming at the start of Constitution Hill's season, with Lossiemouth having already had that win, that she's going to start favourite, surely.
I mean, he has won round there, and she's never been round there.
Yeah,
There's always
that's
that
true.
thing with Kempton, you know. Cheltenham's all very well, but would she be suited to racing around there? But the £7 is that's a real thing, isn't it? I still kind of think that when in a small number of your top class races, these horses should be meeting at level weights, shouldn't they? I mean, I accept there has been in the past there's been a need to encourage mares to stay in training, but
you look at brighter days ahead and you go, well, they're still going to go for the mare's hurdle. Like, what is the point?
That's not set in stone either. I mean, you know, I think they may think again about that.
They certainly should. You've just beaten the reigning champion hurdler. Why would you not go for the champion hurdle? It's absolute rubbish.
But just returning the conversation to Boxing Day and the Christmas hurdle.
Lee's lost control.
That's that story of my life. If it does happen, and let's all hope it happens, I mean that will be the best one in the world. That is the race of the day. I know it's King George Day, but most people going there will be absolutely.
Just because it's not at Cheltenham in March doesn't mean it can't be race of the season.
Totally, yeah. And Constitution Hill is so fascinating, so fascinating, because you say he seemed to gallop poorly at Newbury, and he's not run since the Christmas hurdle last season, when he actually didn't produce a particularly high figure by his standards. But it's easy to forget that when he was winning the Supreme, when he was winning the champion hurdle, people were saying, could this be the greatest hurdler of all time? And is there a danger that, a bit like when any good 2-miler comes along now, particularly the Nicky Henderson stable, John Bon or Shishkin or Altior, there's all this talk of where does this horse sit against Sprinter Sacra? Is another Sprinter? When Sprinter Sacra reach levels way beyond even what a very, very good horse can hit. You know, Altior, John Bon, Shishkin, they're not and weren't Sprinter Sacra, because at his best he was almost like of another species. Is there a danger that we see a good horse like Lossiemouth come along, run to, again, figures in the high 150s, and say, well, she could beat Constitution Hill, but if he turns up at his best, he'll surely gallop clear of her?
I wouldn't say
We
that.
don't know.
Okay.
That's the beauty in it, isn't it?
It's going to be a heck of a race.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
I absolutely take your point. I mean, and it looks to me like he's going to be a bigger price than we're used to, well, a much bigger price than we used to be getting about him. And that's going to be tempting.
It's going to draw a lot of people in, isn't it?
Plus, it's not like Nicky Henderson's been getting his excuses in advance. More the other way, really. He's been sort of protesting about our lack of faith in his horse. He's been saying, look, you know, there's nothing that's seriously wrong with this horse. When he runs, he'll be himself again. Yeah. And so it's, you know, that's great to hear.
Perhaps Nicky we trust.
I mean, I think
maybe I trust Nicky. I don't trust Constitution
when
Hill.
when it comes to betting on it, what I would hate is to back the horse and then he finishes second, and then it turns out the connections are completely happy with that run, and you can totally see that happening. If he runs well but not quite well enough, they'll go, well, after the experience that we've had, that's fair enough. So I don't know if I can bring myself to back a horse in those circumstances. Okay. I'd stick with the younger mare.
Which sounds like you're both sticking with
yourself.
I definitely wouldn't have a bet in the race, but I would be so fascinated by it. And I think if Constitution Hill produces anything like his best, he will win, and probably win easily. But it's just that thought of can he reproduce his best on his first run for a year, having not galloped particularly well, seemed to gallop particularly well at Newbury, then having had that issue. But, you know, Nicky Henderson keeps making that point that there hasn't really been anything of any great significance wrong with him.
Yeah, I don't know about that though. If a horse has colic, is that not quite, it was suspected colic quite severe, you know, that's something, isn't it?
But is that more of an illness as opposed to it's more of an illness as opposed to an injury?
That's a question of degree as well. With colic,
can it leave a mark as well?
Potentially, of course it can, but he doesn't seem to think that's an issue in this case.
Well, let's hope it happens. And so if it does happen, it certainly becomes the race today as opposed to the King George.
And that's just one race, you know.
And what about the King George?
It needs to happen, that clash, doesn't it? I mean, we had it. Sadly, Mystical Power didn't quite show up in the fighting fifth, and we had Sergino v Mystical Power. That would have been great, and we missed out, as I say, on Stake Man v Lossiemouth v Brighter Days Ahead at the Morgiana. But King George
doesn't look a vintage King George.
It doesn't, and a lot will depend on Irish participation. The word on the
Tower
street,
of the grounds right.
The word on the street is that Spillane's Tower is going to be supplemented. What a fantastic race he ran in the John Durkan, and a great story too for Jimmy Mangan and his family. Would love to see him turn up. We've got the old boy Envoy Alen in there. We've got maybe Banbridge turning up. So it's very strong on the Irish contingent. Traditionally, they've not done fantastically in the race. They don't tend to target it in the same way.
You don't get many coming over, do you? But I mean, you know, every so often Florida Pearl comes over and wins. I mean, I think Grey Dawning's still at the head of the betting when I looked this morning, which I slightly struggled to wrap my head around, frankly.
Straight after the Betfair chase, Dan Skelton was very clear in saying it will be a long time before he runs again. It was such a hard race, but he seemingly recovered from those exertions quicker and better than they had envisaged.
Well, as far as you can tell.
As far as
I worry. I said this the other day. I think, you know, even if a horse makes a mistake like that, and he's clearly such a high class horse that he can carry on to such a high level even after belting a fence, but I just think that Haydock mud has a way of absolutely ruining horses for a little while.
Steady on.
To me, I don't. I watched
Haydock execs on line one. Great.
It can do though. It can do. You know.
Yeah, I don't know if you quite mean ruin, but yeah.
Maybe not ruin, and not ruin forevermore, certainly, but it can disrupt a season.
Definitely.
Yes. You know, you look at the specialists who have been around there. There was a reason why they succeeded.
Totally. Yeah, it's a Royal Pagaille.
But no, I look back at the Turners last year, and I thought, is that a horse clamouring for a Gold Cup trip? I look at the end.
This isn't a Gold Cup trip, is it? This is definitely not.
It is a different scenario, but and I think this is the race that will, in theory, suit him more than the Gold Cup. But even still, I just have a worry that Haydock could have left it.
Surely no one's backing him at 7-2. That's the fundamental point, right?
And in terms of horses bouncing back, Il Est Francais, who was the favourite for the King George, has now flopped twice, hugely so at Auteuil.
12-1.
Yeah.
I'd be so interested in that, but you just want to see the yard having some winners, because they've had a few horses they sent over here have run slightly below expectation.
General on Chef ran well.
didn't quite get home, did he?
I thought
they knew that was going to happen beforehand. By the
well,
time.
I thought in the end that was a slightly disappointing effort. Anyway, look.
Wow, yeah.
Oh, he's a hard man.
Yeah,
he's a hard man.
What about, I mean, you're talking about big race winners at the minute. You don't need to look much further
Venetia.
than Venetia Williams and Charlie Deutsch.
Yeah.
And good old Lon Presse is going to be back.
And Rob Pagay.
And Royal Pagay potentially. So it's going to be a fascinating King George. And that's without even, we're going to be accused of British bias here. Let's get into Leopardstown, the Savills Chase.
Well, because realistically, I don't suppose that many people will think we'll be seeing the potential Gold Cup winner in the King George.
No.
Whereas in the Savills Chase, well, I mean, we certainly could, couldn't we?
Yeah, Factor File, the Galopin des Champs, maybe the some other, of those up and
Jerry
coming.
Colombe.
Jerry Colombe, some of those other up and coming novices from last year. And Lee, you have made my morning this morning because you said that Ballyburn could go for the Wayward Lad, and I happened to be at Kempton on that day. So
yeah, well, certainly Willie Mullins was saying, wasn't he, after the horse won on his first out of offences, that because that Grade 1 2-mile chase at Leopardstown over Christmas no longer exists, that there's not, in his view, an obvious race for him there. He is in the Grade 1 at Limerick over 2.5 miles.
That would be the logical one for me.
Willie actually raised the Wayward Lad Novices Chase, and realistically, if he does go for a race like that, he's probably going to be 6-7 to 1 on. There's going to be no.
Wouldn't it be good if we could see Ballyburn v Lotus Sud?
We won't see him at
race?
Christmas, but we might. After that race at Sandown, they're looking more towards the Kingmaker with him, aren't they? I think. But yeah,
that's what I'm clutching at straws. I'm thinking if Ballyburn does turn up, what else is going to be there? I want something.
But it'll be great to see him
classy
though at Kempton over Christmas.
Certainly will.
I mean, I remember from last Christmas, there's a whole bunch of good racing. I mean, and not necessarily high quality stuff, but it's competitive at tracks all around the country, Boxing Day and the days after. I always love the Welsh Grand National.
Yeah.
And then there's the Paddy Power over in Leopardstown. I usually have an annual moan about how the race planners either side of the Irish Sea don't seem to talk to each other because we need more than 10 minutes between those two races. You definitely don't want to see the Cornwall Welsh National still being run whilst they start the Paddy Power over there. So hopefully they've sorted that this time. But I mean, yeah, I'm really looking forward to basically a week in front of the telly and occasionally at the track, just trying to bet on as much of it as I possibly can. That's my idea of Christmas gluttony.
Yeah, and excellent gluttony as well, and we'd all go along with that. Okay, we've had 3 stories. I've got to say at this point who's the winning story, and because it's Christmas, and because we want to be upbeat, and because we want to be positive, let us say, Maddie, that looking ahead to the Christmas racing action and all the great stuff it might have in store, potentially, hopefully, Lossiemouth and Constitution Hill in the Christmas hurdle. I think that is the winning story.
I hope so, Lee.
Yeah, I don't object.
I mean,
to that.
I
positive stuff.
don't think it was a shared story. We all discussed it.
Yeah.
I don't think it was particularly mine, but I will take the win because I'm so gracious about it.
Lovely message of goodwill at this time.
Lee does not give out these wins like sweets, so you've got to savour it while you can.
No, indeed. Okay, thank you. Thank you for watching. Thank you to Chris Cook and to Maddy Playle. As you said, this is the final programme before Christmas, so we hope you have the most wonderful Christmas and festive season. We will be back not long after that, but until then, have a great time and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.